Get your head out of the clouds when it comes to security. Now, I'm not suggesting that you can't use cloud-based security, but I am saying that you need to clear your mind to really understand the outcomes that you're driving towards. So let's take a step back and have a look at this for a second here. Let's look at AWS, and I'm calling this complexity because there is a lot of elements here to consider. Very similar to on-premise, but now cloud-based. The complexity comes with a combination or collection of capabilities across multiple different forms. So let's look at security groups, right? The ability to provide a control mechanism from an L3, L4 perspective. You've got API access. You have VPC logs that are similar to NetFlow or JFlow logs that we see on traditional on-premise environments. Multi-factor authentication, you've got DDoS, you've got next-gen firewalling capabilities that you can add. You have endpoint protection, advanced malware protection, you've got application segmentation, you've got DNS, you've got web proxy, you've got web application firewall, and VPN capabilities. And there's probably much more. But that gives you kind of a high-level understanding of some of the security capabilities within AWS. And you might say, well, that's fantastic. Look at all that stuff. You're right, it is fantastic. But let's walk through this a little bit, and we can certainly see some of the challenges that we end up having. Because what happens is a lot of times as you start transitioning to the cloud, many organizations will start with one cloud vendor. But you also have an on-premise environment. You also have SaaS-based technologies, and tend to transition into using multi-cloud environment to diversify a little bit. And you can see that all of these different components can certainly become challenging. So let's just break down for everyone here around some of the security capabilities. I'm not going to be able to cover them all. AWS, for example, has a very good security architecture that you can follow. But let's walk through some of these. So AWS CloudTrail, what is that? Well, it's a service that supports governance, compliance, operational auditing, and risk auditing of your AWS account. So if you use an API, for an example, to access it, it's audited and it's logged. That's perfect, right? That's what we want. We want that in every environment. You have security OU tooling. Now you got things like EventBridge. Well, what is that, right? It's a frequently used in security automation. You can set up routing rules to determine where to send your data and build application architectures that react to real-time. So that's kind of neat, right? You can link this with AWS Config, GuardDuty, Security Hub. We'll talk about some of these. But you link that with EventBridge, and then you can create flexible automated pipeline for routing security data, raising alerts, and managing actions to resolve issues. That's pretty neat. And then you got Amazon GuardDuty, which is a threat detection services that continuously monitors for malicious activity and unauthorized behavior to protect your AWS accounts and workloads. Right? So it talks about capture and storing the appropriate logs for monitoring and auditing purposes, but it pulls independent streams of data from AWS CloudTrail, VPC flow logs, that's like NetFlow or JFlow, and then AWS DNS logs. So that's all good stuff. Security Hub provides you with a comprehensive view of your security state in AWS and helps you check your environment against security industry standards and best practices. Awesome. Security Hub collects security data from across AWS integrated services supported by third-party products and other custom security products that you may use. It helps continuously monitor and analyze your security trends and identify the highest priority security issues. Well, we certainly need help there. Firewall Manager, this helps protect your network by simplifying your administration and maintenance tasks for WAF, Web Application Firewall. AWS Shield Advanced, which is DDoS capabilities. You've got VPC security groups, AWS Network Firewall, Route 53 DNS Firewall. And again, being able to do this across multiple accounts. And then Amazon Detective, there's a couple other elements here and we'll cover them off as we go along, but the Amazon Detective supports your responsive security control strategy by making it easy to analyze, investigate, and quickly identify root cause of security findings and suspicious activities. Detective automatically extracts time-based events such as logon or login attempts, API calls, network traffic from AWS CloudTrail, Amazon VPC flow logs. You can explore the behavior graph and examine disparate actions such as failed logon attempts or suspicious API calls. This is all really good stuff. This is not a knock. And in fact, I'm impressed by the capabilities that are available in these environments. Lambda, so it's an event-driven serverless compute platform provided by Amazon, so allows us to run code in response to events or automatically manages the computing and resource required by that code. So the goal here is that you can send an event to Lambda and Lambda can do or invoke a whole bunch of different things. And obviously in security, that can be very, very helpful. And so you can see here is a little breakdown of detect, ingest, remediate, and log. And you've got Security Hub that can be integrated, which gives you a comprehensive view of your security alerts and security posture across AWS accounts, automatically detects deviations from defined security standards and best practices. So certainly good stuff as mentioned. And then you've got CloudWatch event rules, and then the ability to use AWS Lambda to be able to invoke certain actions. Now we've got logging, and this screenshot here, and there's some other capabilities. I'm not going to be able to cover them all, but the goal here is if you can centralize logging, obviously that's always a good thing. I'm a big believer in that. But what about everything else, right? So if you're in AWS and you're 100% in AWS, this is phenomenal capability out of the gate that you can actually use and leverage. The problem is most people aren't 100% in the cloud. And they're not 100% in a single cloud. And they may start there. And again, this is the challenge that I've seen over and over and over again, is that you start building out these capabilities, turning on all this integration, and then you start leveraging other cloud environments, and you've got to start all over. And that's what we're going to talk about. So here's an infrastructure OU network. So again, they do a really good job of showing you what the architecture and components look like. So you've got some inbound VPCs here. You might have NAT, you might have proxy and IDS and IPS. You might have that AWS network firewalling. You've got flow logs in place. You've got Route 53 for DNS. So any recursion that needs to happen will hit that Route 53 or DNS server first. You've got AWS Shield, and so this is DDoS capabilities. You've got web application firewalling, and you've got access logs there and available to you. At the bottom, you can see Security Hub and Guard Duty and your CloudTrail, the components we talked about. And then zooming in here, you've got network-based ACLs as well for L3, L4 stateless-based controls. You got security groups that gives you stateful control. That's all good stuff. And you can see, actually, let me go back for a second. This is just showing you some of the directory services or identity components that you can certainly leverage within your cloud environment. So you've got AWS directory services or managed Active Directory as an example. And again, you can see they really tie in a lot of the security elements that we've talked about. And then here we've got workload, and you've got your EC2 instance. You have inspector, an inspector agent. So you not only have a detective, but you have an inspector, and implements two types of detective controls, which test the network for accessibility of your EC2 instance and the security state of your applications that run on those instances. And so we can use all the help that we can as defenders. And so this certainly helps. Secrets Manager provides us the ability to store credentials. And so they're not easily accessible. And we can retrieve those, such as database credentials, API keys, and other secrets throughout their life cycle and manage that. And then we've got, key management platforms. We've got certificate authorities. We've got, the cloud HSMs. You've got, all those other components and more and more and more and more stuff, right? And so AWS has a lot of stuff. And there's no knock here, right? There's a lot of really great stuff available to the consumer to help them secure them, and not only help them secure them, but also help augment their teams. But let's think about this for a second. What if we have an AWS environment, we have an on-premise environment, and then we've got this Azure environment? And so we've got some terminology that changes. The security groups becomes network security groups, or NSG, and then you've got NSG logs versus VPC logs, but they're the same outcome. And then you've got other components, and I'm not going to dig as deep in Azure, and they have very similar capabilities, but you've got Azure Security Center, right? Security Center helps you prevent, detect, and respond to threats, increased in visibility and control over the security of your Azure resources. It provides integrated security, monitoring, and policy management across your Azure subscriptions. It helps detect threats and might otherwise go unnoticed, and works with a broad ecosystem of security solutions. So this is, again, phenomenal, but am I going to use this? Am I going to use the one in AWS? Azure Monitor. Applications, operating systems, Azure resources all feed into this metrics and logs, and then you've got the ability to do insights and visualize, analyze, respond, and integrate. So essentially it offers visualization. You've got query, routing, alerting, auto scale, and automation on data, both from Azure subscriptions, so activity logs, and each individual Azure resource, so resource logs. You can use Azure Monitor to alert you on security-related events that are generated in Azure logs. So again, good stuff, but where do I want to do it? How do I centralize it? The questions are starting to arise. Azure Advisor is a personalized cloud consultant. Well, we can use that. That helps you to optimize your Azure deployment. So it analyzes resources, configurations, usage, telemetry. It then recommends solutions to help improve performance, security, and reliability of your resources while looking for opportunities to reduce your overall Azure spend. And so you can see here in the middle, you've got this security tab with 31 recommendations. You've got 20 high impact, you've got 7 medium, and 4 low. So again, really cool capability that we could certainly leverage. And then in fact, you have the option to add additional services. Some of them we've already mentioned, right? You can leverage them or not. Some are paid, some are not. This one is typically additional. And so if you look at Azure Sentinel, which provides you SIEM capabilities, and SOAR, so security orchestration, automation, and response, is available as well. So cool. Now, do I use this for on-premise and cloud? I could, right? That's an option. But it is a scalable cloud-native security information event management and security orchestration automated response platform or solution. Sentinel delivers intelligent security analytics and threat intelligence across the enterprise, providing a single solution for alert detection, threat visibility, and proactive hunting and threat response. So again, that's pretty neat capability that you may want to invest in. And it's got playbooks that you can run through here as well, right? So you can create a response to some type of alert, create a record, post a message, send an approval, take some action as an example. So here you've got block user in Azure AD, and then block IP on a firewall as an example, and then close the incident in ServiceNow. So that's all really great stuff. And then here's a little bit of the architecture, right? You've got your network security groups, you've got your applications, you've got multi-zone environment, you've got a key vault, you've got your L3, L4 based controls, both inbound and outbound. You've got your web application firewall. You've got Windows Defender. You've got Azure DDoS. You've got Azure Firewall. You've got MFA. You've got a lot of stuff. So these are all positive. These are not negatives. The challenge, though, is complexity and multi-cloud or environments in general, right? So if I have an on-premise environment, I have a SaaS-based environment, I have a AWS environment, I have maybe an Azure environment, there's quite a bit of complexity there. And so I've got to be careful on where I start implementing these controls and how I leverage them. So let's look at on-premise, and we're obviously not going to go deep here at all, but we've got, we take out the, security groups or network security groups, we put in firewalling, and then flow logs, versus NSG logs or VPC logs. But again, very similar outcomes here. And we keep the other controls in place. The good thing here is that we've been taking our smarty pants on-premise security guru vitamins for some time. And so we're pretty good here. I mean, there's still work to do in on-premise environments, but we're pretty good here, right? We typically have built a level of capability here. Now, how do I, make sure that I'm covering all of these? And so, we can probably see the complexity here. We can see Anonymous certainly does. And again, I love the image, so take it for what it's worth. But here you can see, they feel that the complexity on their side, or any adversary, and for that matter, sees this as an advantage, right? The advantage is complexity, and complexity we know is the enemy of security. And so now we look at all these different components, right, that are distributed across all these different environments. And we can see that this can get very, very messy very, very quickly. And, we also got other cloud environments. You might have GCP, you might have Oracle, you might have Kubernetes. Even though that's not a cloud environment per se, it's a different mechanism than we're used to with traditional compute. And then you've got SaaS-based services, as I mentioned. All of these need security as well. And so if I'm using every single vendor's capability, the capability in Azure, I'm using their DDoS, and AWS, I'm using their DDoS, and then GCP, I'm using their DDoS. I have my own DDoS on-premise. You can see how messy and complicated this gets. And sure, you can centralize and send logs somewhere, but you still need to be, proficient in the technologies and managing them. And this definitely becomes a burden on teams that are already well, overburdened with everything that we do today. And then you've got things like to consider. What about risk-based vulnerability insight, mitigation on top of that, and all of these different environments? And so, the questions to me start to come and percolate, right? How do I centralize visibility? Do I have the right protections in place? Do I really understand where I need these controls? How do I manage all of these controls? That's obviously a big one here. Do I need an expert in every one of these areas? How do I consume threat intelligence? Do I cover detect, prevent, and response capabilities? How do I hunt for threats? What about orchestration and automation? Can I build playbooks against the entire ecosystem of capabilities? Right? What about incident response? Everyone does it different. How do I become proficient, as I mentioned earlier? And do I really understand my attack surface? Have I taken a step back? And everybody knows that, this is something I always come back to, is understanding how the asset, the user, talks to a service, as an example, and truly understanding the capabilities required to feel comfortable that you have a level of a control in place that reduces your overall risk. So let's look at this from an attacker perspective just for a moment, and maybe we can highlight the complexity that might exist here. And this is going to be a very simple use case. And so as we go through this, We've got our AWS environment. We've got lots of stuff in here. And I didn't want to overcomplicate it by adding every different layer. But there's certainly controls that you've got to get through. Is it impossible? Absolutely not. But you do have to overcome them. And so let's assume we've got guard duty, and it's taking in the sources of information, including VPC logs. And we've got our adversary. In this case, they make a connection to the internet gateway. There's a control there, and it blocks them. Okay, so there could be obviously a log here. Then we've got our traditional data center. We've got a VPN connectivity between the two. And we've got NetFlow or IP fixed data being sent to a flow collector on premise. And there's an attempt to get into the environment. So this could be, your internet edge firewall, and then into your data center. And maybe your data center has a firewall. Hopefully it does. And it's blocked. Okay. Then an EC2 instance is started within the environment itself, and maybe first off, it's going to be audited, right? That's going to be logged, but it started, and maybe it's a bastion host that somebody got some keys to that was able to get into the environment. And again, we're not going to talk about the process to get that or have that happen, but that's certainly doable. And I'm able to start an instance and get in and land on that system. And so now I'm on that system. I didn't have to go through any of the controls. I was able to get into that maybe bastion host or public asset, or I compromised a vulnerability or something like that, right? And now I'm in the network. I'm in that public segment. There's some routing between public and private. And I'm able to make my way into the private environment. And then I start moving laterally within the environment. And, in most cases, you're probably going to have the logging, the VPC log or the flow log is going to actually be recorded. Okay, so that's good, I guess. Bad is that somebody's in there, but they've used that VPN connectivity or direct connect or express route, depending on who you use and what you use. But they've been able to now move into the data center itself. And there could be controls here as well, right? Most likely there is. There's probably, before you get into the data center, you've got to go through a firewall. But let's assume the rules are in place and they're able to do that. They start then probing this service-based farm that has all kinds of different stuff, and then land on a system and then continue their pivot. And then there's another VPN, and again, that flow log would be recorded on the on-premise collector. But now I'm moving, and I continue to move laterally, and now I'm in Azure, and I'm obviously adding less elements here, but you get the idea. And now the NSG log is stored in Network Watcher as an example. And so now I've got these 3 different flow logs. So I don't have a full visibility end to end from a flow perspective. And we're only talking from a flow perspective. We're not talking about your endpoint security. We're not talking about your firewall components. You're not talking about the logging in your security groups or your network security groups or your NACLs. We're not talking about, web application firewalls, IPSs. We're not talking about where all that other data may sit that helps you determine what really happened here. We're just talking about the log data from flow. And so as an analyst or an incident responder, I might jump into guard duty and CloudTrail and then figure out, okay, how did that EC2 instance get started? Who started it? And then I start looking at the VPC logs. And then I've got to start making my way through trying to understand, okay, they made it here. How did they move laterally, right? With just log data as an example from VPC, but you would obviously complement this with other feed data from your security technologies. So I would do that, and then I would then hopefully make my way and understand that they went to AWS, made their way on into the on-premise environment, And now I'm analyzing flow logs there. And hopefully, I get enough information here to make a decision that now I've got to look into Azure and continue following that path. And you got to remember there could be multiple layers of NAT as we are starting to transition here. And you can see, to me, this is tremendously complex. And if anything, this adds time to detect. Right? This adds to your ability to detect what might be happening, and then ultimately the response capability, which is dangerous. And so, you're working as hard as you possibly can trying to tie these all together and try to figure out what happened. And again, you've got to remember, what about everything else? What about DDoS? What about WAF? What about IPS? What about next-gen firewall? What about endpoint security? What about, right? That also is part of telling the story. You can't ignore those capabilities. So imagine doing this every single time in different environments. And sure, you might have some things that stream across all different platforms, but it certainly becomes challenging. And you might say, well, I just jumped to a SIEM. Well, that's fine. You can jump to a SIEM, but you can still see operationally this is a burden and a headache. And the tools might have different features and capabilities. So you might be able to do certain flow log searching or advanced searching, or you might be able to have complementary capabilities that enhance the flow data in one product and another product not so much. And so you can see that this is certainly going to be a challenge for everyone. And we can see here, we're liking this. As an adversary or even a red teamer, although their goal is to ultimately secure the environment, the complexity of security is the enemy of security, and therefore the red team can certainly highlight their skills and capabilities here, right? And again, the ultimate goal for red teamers are to help further secure the environment, but they've got lots of opportunity here. So what you want to do here is really take a step back. Even if you've started the deployment, started leveraging cloud, you want to take a step back and understand your business flows, right? Your use cases. So customer browsing prices to an e-commerce web application. You've got application workloads downloading updates and patches from an update server. You've got front-end web server invoking back-end APIs and the back-end e-commerce application engine. You've got application engine to database zone. And then you've got DevOps remotely accessing cloud workloads management zone as well. And so identifying these is going to help you determine the capabilities required to secure each of those flows. So that's the first step. And you should do this for on-premise or workflows or use cases or business flows, whatever you want to use to describe them. But the goal here then is kind of understand the risks here, right? So, well, it's a customer, so we've got untrusted user. You've got threats like DDoS and web vulnerabilities, network breach. You've got advanced threat. You've got malware and infection. And again, this is just an example. But what you want to do is understand what are the risks of this particular use case, right, or business flow. Same thing when you look at the other ones here, you see some similar things, but you don't have an untrusted user per se, right? You've got this application or workload, but you've got infection, you've got advanced threats, malware, network breach, advanced threats, malware, and infection. So you've got it on both sides, right? You need malware protection on the workload on the left, and then you need malware protection on the servers themselves, if those are servers that you own, as an example. And even if you don't, you probably want a network-based control that is providing a malware protection element as well, right? Because you don't want to protect, as I said 100 million times to everyone I talk to, is you never want to protect on the asset that is making the request. You have to, unfortunately, but that's not where you want that control. You want that control and mitigate the mitigating component of that farthest away from that asset you're protecting. And you can see here, you got web front end. So you can see a trend here. There's a lot of similarities. You can add and move some of these risks around. You might say all the risks are the same across them all. But you need to come to that realization of what is required in order to secure it. And so once we have this, now what we can do is start looking at what are the capabilities that help mitigate that risk. And so some might be apparent based on the threat. So for example, DDoS, well, DDoS would provide, how do I mitigate that? Well, maybe if I had DDoS protection, right? Other things might be flow analytics, which might not be, based on the risks that you're identifying. If you don't call out something like visibility, you might miss that. But you go through there and you can see here you got segmentation, intrusion prevention, network anti-malware, flow analytics, anomaly detection, threat visibility, vulnerability management, anti-malware. You want to do this without products. You're not saying AWS this or this product from this vendor from my on-premise environment, this, that. You might be aligning that in your head based on existing investments. But what you don't want to do is get into the product game here. You're really focused on truly understanding the capability. And you're going to do this for every single one of them. And you'll start picking up themes as you go through. You'll see that there's a level of security required for every single flow. It really doesn't change. And then you'll see some new things. Like at the bottom, you've got DevOps, remotely accessing cloud workloads. So you've got things like secure remote access. You've got web application firewall, right? And so that particular flow has, some additional needs in order to mitigate risk. And so now that I have that, that's going to be helpful. And then what I want to do, again, agnostically, try to figure out how do I get DNS and web layer security across my entire stack of capabilities, right? Whether that's multi-cloud environment, whether that's pure play one vendor environment, because I don't know the future. And that's one thing in IT that we can't predict, right? Is the future. We try, we do our best, but things can change very, very quickly. And COVID-19 is a perfect example of that, right? We had to change and adopt very, very quickly. We've always had remote access, but we never had it at the scale of which we are today, even still leveraging it. And in fact, we're not even going to get away from it, right? Hybrid's here to stay forever. And so you've got things like firewalling and VPN, IPS, and malware. So how do I do that consistently across the breadth of capabilities that I've introduced? You got flow analytics. You've got multi-factor authentication, right? So you don't want to have and leverage multiple different tools throughout this, and you want to centralize the information and be able to use it easily and be able to make decisions based on that data. Application segmentation, okay? You still need that not only in AWS and Azure, but you're going to need that on your on-premise environments. Now, you might be saying, well, I'm transitioning away from my on-premise environment. Well, that's fine too, but do you leave the gap until you transition away? Or do you add and enhance your security posture because you never know how long that transition happens? Everyone has a goal and a timeline, but what happens is you find out there's an application dependency and now you can't transition it to the cloud, or the vendor no longer supports, so you have to go to, or doesn't support that transition, at least not today. And so either you have to go to market, reevaluate the products, try to find something that's cloud friendly or cloud native. All of that takes time. We all know that. And so do you leave that risk open for that period of time? Probably not. Endpoint, advanced malware detection, endpoint detection response, right? So again, across the entire breadth of capabilities, you got DDoS and WAF. And so you can get the idea here, right? And then you've got to consider other environments, GCP, Oracle, Kubernetes, although it's not a cloud offering itself. It's a container, but it does give you some complexity, and so that's why I've called it out. And then you've got SaaS, right? And SaaS might not be things that you do in SaaS, like you're not controlling the infrastructure. You have control of the security typically within the application itself, but you may have controls on the consumer side that's accessing that SaaS-based application, for example, like Cloud Access Security Broker. And then risk-based vulnerability assessment and mitigation. We want to do that. Hygiene's always going to be a problem, but if you have multiple different tools that you're getting that information from, it's certainly going to be difficult. So zooming into each of these, right, you're going to understand what is the capability that you might want to drive towards. And so this is an example of on an endpoint and some of the controls you might want to consider on the endpoint. Some of these might be network-based controls. Some of these might be endpoint-based controls or capabilities. And you want to look at this. The blue is really around prevention, and then the green is around detect and response capabilities. But you want to make sure that you're including detect and response throughout your thought process here, because that's what's really going to matter. And then APIs, you've got APIs across them all, and how do you secure them? How do you get visibility into them as well? And then as you continue, you might want to look at extended detection response capabilities, truly understanding what's happening in the environment. So give it an observation or an indicator, be able to search that data set and pull all of that data from multiple different sources into a centralized view. And typically you'd want some type of visual that shows you, you know what, here's that flow, right? I saw these security elements triggered along the path. And now I got a better sense of what happened here, and then drill into the independent products to truly understand what happened. So you could put the mitigating controls in place and ultimately get rid of the threat, right? So you don't have reoccurrence of compromise continuously because you're still missing a piece of the puzzle. You got orchestration, automation, playbooks, threat hunting, instant response. We saw that called out earlier from Azure. They've got some capabilities. But again, you want to make sure that you're stretching that capability across all of these different environments. And then you've got to consider threat intel and how you're consuming it, and where those sources are coming from. But in the end, it's really about removing the complexity. And if you start too quickly and you jump in too fast, a lot of times I'm seeing people, struggle trying to decouple some of the things that they've done to simplify their cloud architecture when it comes to security. So securing cloud can get complex very quickly. We understand or need to understand the executive drivers, threats, and risks to the business and business flows is key in determining what is required. What is the capability to drive an outcome? Building security for the cloud with an open mindset and consider the bigger picture. So a lot of times people will get in there, they'll learn about AWS, and all of a sudden now, infrastructure architect, as an example, or a cloud architect will say, well, we need to turn on this security, this security, this security, this security, this security, but not understanding the big picture when it comes to security and complexity. Building cloud security tools that may be limited, and we'll introduce fragmentation when considering the big picture. So private, public, hybrid, SaaS, etc. We've talked about this in depth, right? The more of these tools you leverage, they're going to add complexity, but not only that, how mature are they? Are you getting the ability to use these tools in a manner of which that you're used to with a lot of your on-premise security capabilities today? I'm not saying that you're using your on-premise security capability to drive that outcome in cloud. There certainly should be a cloud capability that offers, maybe the nuances that are in cloud as well, right? And then APIs drive programmatic outcomes, which fuels things like orchestration, automation, and workflows. So this is going to ultimately help you reduce the time to respond. And then consider all aspects of detection, prevention, and response when building out the security solution. So don't look at this from here's a defensive capability, because ultimately you need to understand how to detect and ultimately respond, because regardless of the security vendor, the capabilities that you drive into your environment, compromise is still going to happen, right? You're never going to be 100% secure. And so you want to think about these things, what if? And then participation from all teams. So don't look at this saying only the cloud team should be looking at this. This should be network security, cloud, audit, risk. It could be governance teams. It could be help desk. The more eyes you have on this, usually the better outcome. Yes, there's a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of passion in that room typically, but you end up driving the best solution for the organization itself. So not liking this guy, that's okay, right? And again, that's just an image, nothing more. And now we're at the level where we're taking our smarty pants multi-security guru vitamins, right? We're not just an on-premise guru. Now we're a security guru that understands the threats and risks to our business across all types of environments, whether that's private cloud, public cloud, hybrid cloud, on-premise, SaaS. You got Kubernetes distributed throughout either one of those environments, yada, yada, yada. We're taking our smarty pants multi-security vitamin and we're good to go. So get your head out of the clouds when it comes to security, but it doesn't mean you can't use cloud-based security controls or capabilities.